Want to drive faster? Listen in as Kinch Rendell, an SCCA National Trophy winner and multi-time Pro Solo champion himself, interviews the best autocrossers in the land. He talks fast and drives even faster. And now here's your host, Kinch Rendell.
Hello. Today we have Brian Peters on the show. He was your 2015 Driver of Eminence Award winner. In 2015, he won a Pro Solo Championship and the Solo Nationals Championship in a Mustang GT in the ESP class. He has 6 championships in 6 different classes. So in 2014, it was STU Nissan 350Z. He drove that same car in STR the year before, winning as well. In 2012, he won F-Stock in a Mustang. In 2011, he coned away the F-Stock win. In 2010, he was the Solo National Champion in DSP in the BMW 330i. He also was the 2010 Pro Solo Class Champion in that same BMW 330i. In 2009, sometimes the weather will get you. In 2008, he was first in CSP in a Mazda Miata. So that's 11 trophies out of 12 nationals. And rain cost him the other one. Want to talk about someone who's fast, someone who has fun? That's what I take from this interview, as well as all the good tips. He points out that we're out here to have fun. The community, once again, engaging with the community, having fun, remembering, hey, we're driving around a parking lot around rubber cones. Let's have some fun. Let's meet people. Let's get to know them. Brian was a great sport to do this. He's a car builder as well in my mind. I hope you learned something. Let us know what you think. If you like the show, please go to iTunes and leave us a review. You can also drop us notes on Facebook. That's facebook.com/autocrosstalk. You can leave some notes on the website as well. Give us some feedback. Let us know what you think, what questions you have. Enjoy. Brian, welcome to the show. Can you start off by telling us, when did it all begin for you? What was the first bit of racing, and when did autocross come in?
Sure. Thank you. It started for me back in 99, I guess. I got invited out to an event by a friend of mine, part of the Formula SAE program in college. And came out, ran his RX-7. Was on VFG Rivals, R1s to date that. And had a good time. Realized I was hooked. And I've been pretty much doing it ever since.
So were you on the FSAE team in college?
Yeah, yes, I was. The program at Arizona State had gone dormant for a few years, so we were a little more junkyard wars than we were Formula SAE, but we were able to get a car together and we were able to make it to Michigan and compete.
So one thing that came up in our previous interview with Julian Garfield was he's looking at colleges just for FSAE. And one thing it seems like it realized, tell us, did that benefit you when you got out of college? Did that give you any connections? And what did it mean to you? What did you learn and have experiences in there?
The program has evolved quite a bit since when I was in there, for the better, obviously, and it's carried a lot more importance. Knowing what I know now, it sounds like Julian's taking the best approach possible, because I would say absolutely it has really helped solidify having the hands-on experience that a lot of engineering degrees don't come with. So if you plan to do anything automotive, for sure, I think it's a requirement these days almost. And anything engineering related, it's gonna really help you down the road.
Cool, and I'm going to give credit. That's why you're also so fast. You know something from that. What was your first car?
Well, the car I was driving at the time wasn't very autocrossable. It was an older Toyota Cressida automatic. So the next car that I went to that I actually started autocrossing in myself was a 99 VW Golf. So I started off in the low horsepower front wheel drive cars that I really think is a good way for anybody to start in the sport, to be honest.
Hey, I'm a little slow, so I'm still in front wheel drive slow, low horsepower cars. That's I'm gonna chalk that up to. So a Toyota Cressida automatic, was it a 99? What year was that?
No. This was an inherited vehicle. It was a 1980. So we're going back to vintage Japanese cars. Yeah.
No, my grandmom had one, and she never drove it. And I remember some point around there, I think hers was a little bit newer, right before they became a Lexus. I thought, I should buy that. It has like 2,000 miles on it. But literally it had issues because they never drove it. So I can picture, not a 1980, maybe I'll have to pull that up, a Cressida. So then the Volkswagen Golf, how long did you stick around in that one, and how was that for you?
I stuck around with the Golf until the first time I got to drive a Miata. So I think it was probably a year or two maybe that I ran that. Started in street tires and eventually picked up, some used race tires and ran it in the H-Stock class for a while. But yeah, as soon as I got to drive a 10th anniversary NB Miata, I realized there's a lot more fun to be had, at least for me. And that pretty much moved me over to get a 99 Miata, and then from there it's been a wide range of cars.
Oh, well, I'm going to quiz you on most of them. So take us back to those first couple of years. How many events were you doing? Did you take any classes?
I was probably hitting every local event, so maybe travel a little bit. So probably averaging, one event a month. Classes, I think I did some of the local schools the first year or two. Mostly just having fun, realizing that if you have the wrong parts on your car, it easily moves you into uncompetitive classes. So the first few years were really just to have fun, and it was just social activity for me and my friends. And it wasn't probably until I started running in C-Stock with the Miata that I started trying to actually prep for classes and go from there.
And do you tie any of your mechanical engineering training degree into thinking, oh, yeah, I should start trying some different things here? Or what really kind of clued you in? I consider you very good at car setup. With all the championships you have and the success you've had, I'm thinking you must know some tips or thoughts there, or some training or something you just learned from autocross.
Oh, I appreciate that, the compliment. I'm not going to tout myself as a car setup expert, but, I feel like I can make a car work. I don't necessarily go at it from an analytical standpoint. I think I have the ability to analyze through feel. I'm not really a guy to look at, suspension modeling spreadsheets and rely on those as gospel. They're nice tools, obviously, to get some comparative numbers between different setups. But for me, it's really just been a matter of coming in with a baseline and then testing, trying different spring rates, trying different, alignment settings, whatever it may be, to maximize on the car's strength.
And when you say feel, are you also looking at a clock? Are you doing testing like with a slalom, you're going through the same slalom with a timing? What do you do for that?
I went through a few periods where I was using, DL1s with co-drivers and things of that nature. A Max Q, I think, back in the day as well. Things like that are certainly great tools if you have co-drivers, or if there's an odd chance you can actually set up and do some real testing tuning. But for me, it's always been just a simple matter of execution, and I do what I feel is necessary to help me execute better. I don't think there's only one way to drive. I don't think there's only one way to do things, and it really comes down to allowing the driver to go out and minimize mistakes and put together a good run.
Yeah, so I love that thought. Basically, set the car up for how the driver best drives or can drive the fastest, I guess. And in your case, saying not making mistakes, making probably a stable car. Yeah.
I mean, I like a stable car, but at the same time, I like a very responsive car. I tend to run maybe a little higher spring rates, a little stiffer setups. To me, there's typically more time to be lost in the transitional features than there are in, let's say, maximizing steady-state grip. I know this goes against a lot of approaches from other people, but if you think about it, a stock car versus an ST car, they're going to get through sweepers pretty similarly. I mean, yeah, the limits will be higher on one, but where the deltas really show up on the clock is what's required of a driver to slow the car down or to get on the brakes to get through a transitional element. And if you start thinking about segment times, i.e. how quickly can you flow through things, to me, that's where the time is gained.
Flowing from one element transition, let's say braking back into a brake zone back into acceleration zone.
Yeah, or just accelerating up to a three-cone slalom or up to offset gates. How quickly can you get the car through that element? Okay,
and that's where you like the stability you were talking about, because there's more to. My thought is very similar. If a car is too loose that I have to catch it all the time, most likely I'm not going to catch it somewhere. And it's going to cost me more than it made up for.
Absolutely. It does a lot of things. One, the risk reward is very poor. It's going to cause you to focus a lot of mental resources at a particular feature instead of being more proactive and already moving on to the next one. So there's complications there that won't allow a driver to focus out in front of the car like they should be.
Oh, which there's several things here from braking to. I love what John Ames had told me way back when. Evo School 1 teaches you to look ahead. Evo School 2, further ahead. Evo School 3, further ahead. So what would you tell everybody listening? How far ahead do you scan? How important is it to look ahead versus, let's say, memorize? Or what are your thoughts there?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the Evo School, so I can go down that path. I took those as students, and I've taken, I took the Phase 1 a long time ago. The Phase 2, I think I took 3 times. And it wasn't until maybe that second or third time that things started to really click for me mentally, I think, in terms of how you should be approaching things mentally, where you should be focusing your energy, and your resources. And to answer your question, it's really a matter of already knowing what's coming up after the feature that you're driving up to. It's too late to make changes to where where the current car placement is, right? So it's really a matter of just always trying to be one feature ahead. Timing is really important on the looking ahead. I don't think people emphasize that enough during course walks to actually go through and be thinking much more about, at this point, I am now looking over at my exit or whatever, and it's a quick glance, There's a lot of scanning. I'm not gonna claim that I look ahead farther than others. I think I'm efficient at it, but there's often a lot of scanning up and back, and it's really just getting the brain the information that it needs when it needs it.
Yeah, good point. Same thing. I don't know how I learned that or when. It's one excuse I use for not walking the courses a lot. I found when I walked them too much and kind of memorized the courses, I kind of planned it all, and even in brake zone, I would brake for no reason because if you looked ahead, you realized you didn't have to brake there. Once again, the feel, you knew, hey, I'm going there so I can keep accelerating. So very cool. Okay, I'm going to come back and throw this in there because we've got to get this figured out. Are you a left foot braker or right foot?
I am a right foot braker.
That's another thing. Like you said, things are so different for different people. It's been proven, it seems like you can be fast either way, and certain people are fast one way and another. So I love it that there's always people on both sides going, oh, I do this and I do that. And I'm thinking about challenging myself this year to give up the left foot because I realized I used that to settle the car and I probably drag, but then I never lift, which is weird in a front-wheel drive car. So I don't have the lift maneuver. I mean, we only have a steering wheel, a brake, and a gas pedal, really, and I'm kind of not even using that one element we could use there. So here's somebody, did you always right foot brake? Did you ever try left footing, any turbo or anything?
I tried it at different points to see, because I kept hearing that that's the faster way to do it. And, I just never really found that reward. And I stuck with the right foot braking and, being fortunate enough to instruct, and work with a lot of people, I've been able to really see some of the challenges that left foot braking introduces. But at the same time, I also know the benefits it can have for certain applications, for sure.
So let's point out some of those challenges, though. For what are the challenges, or what should people look out for when they are left foot braking?
Well, just like you said, people rely on that to basically every time they want to get some weight on the front, they use a brake pedal, and it's good that they're transferring weight, absolutely, but they're slowing the car down, and lifting is typically, at least with regards to if you do it at the right time, lifting is going to be 95%, 99% as effective, but you're not actually slowing the car down. And again, it goes back to the whole segment time philosophy that, I've almost got 2 clocks running in my head. You've got the overall, we're on the course, I'm on the clock. But then as I approach certain features, I've got little segment timers running to where I want to always be trying to think about efficiency and just get through these things. And when people are left with braking and constantly squeezing, you're bleeding speed off, is the way I look at it.
And I've bled out all the brake boost. And I can picture several times at Nationals, I get to a big brake zone after some slalom I went really fast through, and the brake pedal really doesn't work very well. And if nothing else, it took me years of complaining about this and having co-drivers that never did complain because they didn't left foot brake for someone to say, oh, yeah, if you drag that too much, you run out of your boost or your assist.
Yeah,
and I was like,
about that.
Yeah, I've blown through things at Nationals because I've tapped. And I just got to throw in there, I had Bob Tennell. I realized back in the day driving the BMW he always drives, he would tap the brakes, I don't know, left or right foot, in slaloms, almost at every slalom cone to try to plant the nose of that car. So I was somebody that always learned by watching. I didn't ride with a lot of people to begin with. And I noticed things like that and go, what are you doing and why? So I don't know, did you learn by riding with people? Did you learn by watching everything? What was your thoughts of learning?
Well, learning was, I had just a lot of practice. I felt like I really started improving when I was able to, and I was fortunate enough to receive the opportunity to drive other cars. That when you hop in a familiar car and try to go fast, I think it really helps develop a certain part of the brain that we need to rely on as autocrossers. That part where you're trying to operate out in front of the car, right? But yet still pay attention to what the car is doing underneath you. And when you get into something you're not familiar with and you're pushing hard, you really exercise that aspect, I guess is the best way to put it. So that was a big help for me. And then obviously the Evo schools, like I said, I've had some great instructors, and I remember some specific light bulb moments at some of those schools where, I really felt like, wow, it was kind of a breakthrough. And, I'm somewhat able to see that on the instructing side, and it's really, really cool to see that.
Yeah, no, thanks for the good info there. And I love the thought, saying again that you have two clocks in your head, that you're really thinking about, okay, overall segment time or overall time, and then, oh, what's the segment time here? How am I flowing through this? Oh, I've got to write down the book I read years ago that talked about at all levels of racing, they said the brake zone is what makes the champions, that those who brake the best and the shortest amount of time and can transition back out of that. The book even said that whoever comes out a little bit slower, at least in, let's say you're on a track, it doesn't matter with air friction and everything else. What are your thoughts on how you brake? Are you very aware of even coming off the brake? Are you hitting it hard and efficient? Something tells me if you looked at data, you probably are.
Yeah, I tend to be a little aggressive. I'm not gonna tell you I'm the best braker out there. I've been fortunate enough to drive a lot of cars with ABS these days, and getting back into non-ABS cars, you certainly are reminded that you've got to put a different layer of finesse to the foot. But it's something that I feel like I still struggle with, actually, especially in decreasing radius elements, things like that. I tend to rely a lot on trying to flow through things, and when you get into like a decreasing radius where you've got to deal with that coast versus aggression mentality, right, to still be able to hit your mark, that's one area where I wish I could have maybe a little better control, I guess.
And is this basically trail braking in your mind?
I don't know how to answer that. I mean, people, I think that's a relative term, and it means different things to different people. So, for the most part, I usually try to really settle the car hard, partly, especially when I'm running the heavy Mustang or, Corvette or something. You really need to try to maximize the straight braking zone to get the car settled, and then you can transition in off that brake pedal into the turn. So yeah, there is definitely a trail braking element, I guess, but I tend to rely more on lifts, I think, to rotate than squeezing the brake pedal. I've driven with some very talented left foot brakers that can get the front of a car to do things that I felt like I couldn't. So.
So just so we can kind of understand here, would you say you're lifting and then braking? Are you getting it to rotate before you brake? Just picture something and explain your thought process.
I mean, most turns you're gonna bleed into a heavy longitudinal section, lots of straight line braking, bleed into transition, and then from there I will actually maybe be off the brakes a little bit early, and then start to try to play with the throttle before the apex, if you will, right? If it's a decreased radius or something, and see if I can get the front. We'll see if I can start to get on the gas, hold the line. If I can't, then I'll use that throttle to actually tuck a little harder, and then I can commit to the gas. So, if anything, I may actually brake a little earlier than others.
Okay, because you are probably making sure you're at the maximum speed throughout most of the turn by playing with the gas pedal, as you were saying, and watching your line and reacting back and forth with whichever input you need to do to get on the line at the maximum grip level, I take it.
Yep. Well, to hit my mark, right? Make sure I'm got the car yawed enough, change. That's another thing and part of it's the type of cars I've been driving of late, higher horsepower cars and such. Really want to make sure I'm a little over aggressive in terms of getting the car yawed or turned, so that when I am rolling back into the gas and committing, I'll be able to hold that throttle all the way out for a long duration.
And since I am so clueless about rear-wheel drive, especially with power, I mean, S2000s, I kind of get it. How much you ever turning the car with the gas pedal by adding gas? Or is that too risk-reward, not a good?
No, on exit, absolutely. I do it quite a bit. Just ran the Corvette this week in California. Fontana, it's not a great site. 3 tires, and going back and watching videos, it was really pretty interesting to see how much steering angle is changing getting out of the car just simply through the gas pedal. And 3 tires especially, you should always be working that corner exit to make sure you're getting everything you can out of the tire. You don't want to be leaning on it too hard to get it hot and unhappy, but absolutely, if I can get the car to kind of steer off the corners, that's even better.
Okay, and when you say steer off, once again, I'm going to play like I don't understand because I'm not playing. You're making sure you're coming out the yaw angle correct for the next feature, I take it. You're pointed where you want to be pointed, or you're pointed in straight enough line that you can add gas. You can point the foot.
I think that's the key. It's to be able to find more throttle. To me, autocross is who's keeping the highest average speed, but then who's also on the gas more. And there's usually a good opportunity that if you're just a little more patient, let's say, get the car turned just a little bit more, that you'll be able to get on the gas earlier and harder coming off that corner.
Yeah. This leads me to the thought of tight and tidy. Are you always tight and tidy in your mind, or are there certain examples like this where you want to be on the gas, let's say exiting, where you're not going to be as concerned about, let's say, the tight and tidy line?
It's really a function of what my next feature is.
Okay.
So I'm going to hold I wouldn't say the widest, but the most throttle opportunistic line that'll still have me pointed and placed in the right position for the next feature.
Yeah, that's something when I got in the ST class in the Civic, and Jeff Long and Jason Franklin, these guys are so fast. I was like, okay, I guess I better keep my foot in a little bit longer and sacrifice distance. For some reason, I was never really willing to keep my foot planted exiting something like at the national site after those, seems like at the Pro Solos, hey, take a right or take a left and another left. I finally got to the point where no, I'm going to keep my foot in the gas, and yeah, it's 2 feet over wider, but I'm going to, like you've been saying, maximize acceleration or throttle input.
Yeah, I mean, there's, getting a run out in the West Coast, some of us kind of joke, at least, my close friends, about kind of sloppy fast. And, as speeds go up and as the courses are more open, it really just does come down to more often, are you slowing down or not? And if you can keep your speed up, you're probably going to be faster, even if it's on the sloppy side.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's where something totally kind of random I'll throw in here. When I've had other people drive my cars and I rode with them, at times they'll always do something I didn't try. I still remember Bob Klingler doing something. I'm like, wow, I slowed down way too much for that. Just like you're saying, it's the speed. Can you maintain the speed? And if you're braking where you don't have to or not as much, it obviously pays off big time.
Yeah.
So when you looked at your data and do you compare yourself to yourself often, or are you pretty consistent where that doesn't apply? And do you even find help if you have somebody that's not as fast, let's say overall, but certain features, have you learned things through the data over the years?
I haven't been using it too much of late, but we had a few good years with some good co-drivers, where we could really figure out where someone was gaining some time over the other person. For me, it's just been looking at speeds and, the average speed. Sometimes it can be, the understanding about data is, the one trick I learned is that sometimes, one driver may be hitting the rev limiter, let's say, at the end of a feature.
Yep.
Or the other one isn't, right? You go back and look at the data, and the data actually shows that the average speed was significantly better for the driver that didn't hit the rev limiter. And segment time through there was actually faster. So there's some things like that can be learned. It also applied to a slalom. I remember once back when they were doing the instrument at Evo schools, those are unique opportunities where you get to go out and drill essentially over and over and over again, right? And that's where the data can be really useful for comparing in between runs. I've found it somewhat tough to rely 100% on the data, I would say, between one run to another run, just because the entries and exits can be a little bit different each time. But in the slalom at the Evo School, I distinctly remember Andy Hollis was there. And again, it was a situation where I blasted out on the rev limiter thinking that, that was my best run yet. But you went back and looked at the data, and sure enough, the slower run that had the better placement on the slalom was the faster run. And I realize it's a bit contradictory to what we just talked about earlier, but it's part of why. It's part of why for me I just try to focus on execution. I try to keep it simple. I joke I'm not a very smart guy, and I go out and look for my exits and make sure I hit my marks, and that's the majority of it.
Yeah, and what I can tell you doing the TrackMate, using it the one pro solo when I first got it years ago, when Mary Medicus was faster by a second through the big turnaround up in Washington because her line was tighter, it paid for itself right there, which is probably why I got tight driving. And I tell most people if they're not very competitive, most likely they need to tighten up their line and still be at speed. And then you have to start playing. So eventually, like I said, in ST class, I'm like, wow, I have to play with this line a little bit more. But from the TrackMate, we found it's very easy to move half a second between one segment and the next segment. Because I think exactly what you're saying, if you got into that when you hit the rev limiter, you may have entered that so poorly that it made it easier. Like you may have screwed up the section before that. So I'd like to caution most people when you look at data, one section means nothing until you connect it to the next and the next sometimes.
Yeah. To be honest, video's kind of replaced data for me. I find that's a pretty good way of just looking at, okay, did I actually execute it as well as I remembered? And, to me, video is kind of worthless if you don't see the driver's hands in it.
Yep.
That's another little personal pet peeve of mine. A lot of people put videos up and seeing your dashboard looks great, but it doesn't really show you, if you were actually executing well as a driver or not.
And that's what I love, honestly, about the Civics with the sunroofs. I love that I can see the hands. I can see my head where my helmet's turned. That to me makes it worthwhile. I thought, if I start driving an S2000, I'm going to have to put some mount back there or some bar because I want to see that. So I can't say that how key that is. Now, you talk about hands a little bit. I remember David Falk getting in one of the Integras after he had quit driving D-Stock, and he sawed the wheel. I felt like he was sitting as close to the wheel as possible, and that like the wheel was his plate or something when his mouth was right there, and he would literally in sweepers be playing with the wheel back and forth. Do you do any of that yourself, or have you noticed that in Evo school in teaching and such?
Yeah, I think it's really important that you're constantly feeling whether you're at the limit of adhesion, especially for, say, a front-wheel drive car or corner exit, right? You really need to make sure that are you binding the car up? Unwind the wheel. It's interesting you bring up the sawing. I actually hopped into Hyness's STF RSX this last weekend, and that poor thing just abused his tires, and I was mid-corner just sawing back at about 45 to 60 degree inputs trying to get those front tires to hook. So it's definitely something to pay attention to. But the bigger issue again I find is that people they bind up the car and exit, not letting the car open up and accelerate out as well as they should. And
that's what I think as Robert Thorne rode with me once. He was like, oh yeah, the only thing I'd say is on that exit you should have opened the wheel more. Did you hear the engine? And this comes around awareness of feeling everything else. I'm like, what? I was like, oh yeah, I guess I do keep the wheel in because once again I'm programmed to be tight and tidy.
Yep.
And I may be one race and I might forget it for 3 races, but literally he mentioned, no, you want to open up and make it a little bit easier for the acceleration. So I don't know how to convey that to people, but literally I think it is opening the wheel somewhat, at least in front-wheel drive, to make it easier to accelerate out.
Well, absolutely. I mean, especially for low horsepower Civics, that makes a big difference. And, to me, it's always unwinding the wheel until the point that it starts to affect your line. And then okay, that's as far as I can go. But so many people think they need that much steering input that they've locked in much earlier part of the turn and are just slowing the car down on every corner exit.
Yeah, and I guess one way I think about this, I'm sure I saw it in a book or someone in a class, you've got this graph, or I want to say, a bell curve looking graph of tire grip,
Exactly.
And
exactly.
It was Gabe when he worked at Honda Performance, and he showed me all his data. And he goes, you've got just as much grip turning the wheel 3 degrees more than you need to as you would unwinding it 6 degrees.
Yep.
And his point was some drivers, especially on the track, where they have to run the same tires throughout the day, he goes, they're fast, but since they have to keep the same tires, they've worn them out. And what you're saying to us is if you open the wheel, it's not as hard. You're not wearing as much tire. The slip angle is not as great. You're not tearing up your tires, adding heat. Because once again, by sawing the wheel, and I so believe this, especially on the Rival S's I tried, you really need to figure out where in the heck am I at and can I open it more is what you're really saying, which is kind of like a light bulb moment here. The more open it is, the easier it is for the car to power through.
Yeah, and it's and transferring that over to a rear-wheel drive example, it's a matter of working that throttle constantly, feeling that throttle to where you're right at the right slip angle to where you're getting everything out of the car, but you're not adding unnecessary heat into them.
Oh, okay. I love what Sammy did years ago at Nationals. I watched him as one of the circle features that was like a cone on the inside and outside in f-stock. And he laid down 2 black marks through like half of the circle to the finish. And that's where you guys have such good control with enough power that he was right on some angle where he could just tear away a little bit of the tires and continue on his line.
Yeah, and you got to be careful. Towards the end of the run, that's okay, but if you're constantly slipping, you're just going to add heat and the tires are going to fall off, right? So,
yeah.
It's management and being aware of it too. So.
That's where I remember Bob Klingler, one of the S2000s, driving, goes, that tire's going to be hot now, and as soon as I put too much gas in, put in an S2000 even, here we go sideways. That's literally something in front-wheel drive we never think about. All we're thinking is, can the rear please get warm? So.
Yeah. People don't realize that if they're a little aggressive on 1-2 features, then by the third feature, they've really hurt themselves, right? Because the tire's it's done at that point. So.
Yeah, and do you guys focus on the front near as much, or is it more like us? You're hoping you get heat in the front.
Well, I mean, it depends on the application. I guess maybe better define the question. Are you talking specifically in terms of heat management, front versus rear?
Yeah, well, I just think that us rear-wheel drive people, especially our first run, it's like, oh, I hope the rear sticks. I hope by the third feature are going to have heat there that they're going to stick and grip a little better. I mean, maybe you guys are so equal, it's just all going to heat up at the same time. You're not going to be so worried about the front tires overheating.
Yeah, from my experience, it's a much bigger challenge on the front-wheel drive applications to keep the balance. Typically in a rear-wheel drive, everything might be a little cold, then they'll tend to come up pretty even. So.
Yeah. I was just blinking on the next thought you had me going into. Oh, you were in the new car. Tell us what you want to tell us about the new car, but you drove it on street tires. What was that like?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So I'm going to be looking like a C506 this year, most likely SSR for the bigger events, and 8th Street for the other ones. But I've driven this car. This is actually the car that won 8 stock this last year. It belonged to David Howdy's shelf. James Young won this year. And I've driven it quite a bit, working with those guys, last year. So I was familiar with it, and I really find the C5s a lot of fun on street tires. I was joking with my co-driver. I'm a little worried that once we put the race tires on, it's going to get a little boring because, the street tires have gotten so good these days that they're, they really fit, at least for that car, that application. They fit the performance envelope really, really well to keep it fun and to allow you to have a little bit of slip angle everywhere.
Okay, and I'm going to be a little greedy here and wonder, since there's one sitting in my barn that's not mine, but it's sitting there, what would you tell somebody like me that doesn't have a lot of experience getting into one of those, or anybody? What would you suggest? Okay, you're going to a rear-wheel drive. What would you challenge somebody like me to do? Would you challenge me to overdo it a few times? What kind of crazy thoughts did you have? I
think, the Corvettes are really nice chassis. I joke that they're kind of just big fat Miatas. They've got some power, but it's a car that does everything really well. I mentioned that performance envelope, and it's a very well balanced one on that car. So I think it's one that if you have some good basic experience, that you'll be able to pick up pretty quick. Getting everything out of it becomes a little more challenging, just because you have to maintain a lot of energy from a momentum standpoint. but then still be able to maximize the throttle, where the car shines.
Yeah. I drove Jeff Lundgren's once. I think, it was that model. And I rode with him. And I remember we're coming up to some turn, like, oh, we're going to blow through all these cones. The braking was so amazing. I don't remember what tires we were on. But I literally, like you're saying, it's a good platform overall. And just having such wide front tires, I was probably in an Integra. I'm like, oh my goodness, we're going to blow this. Whoop. I was like, wow. And when I drove it, all I could think was, do not plant your right foot. Do not plant your right foot, which I probably overthought that at this altitude especially, but I just knew, don't do that. Even that FST car.
I think the Corvette and stuff, it was the slower steering ratio and the better balance. They're an easier car to drive, I'd say, than say an S2000, where you have the very quick steering ratio. Yet you're trying to drive it like a momentum car. They change direction so incredibly fast. So in a way, I think there's less to fight you. The challenge is just at getting the overall speed up and keeping it up.
And that's what I remember with the brakes in that car. I mean, I remember my Integra always had good brakes and good brake pads.
Oh, good. Yeah. Integra and Type R's had some of the best brakes ever, in my opinion.
That's why I mentioned Jeff Lundgren. I'm going to call him out. Maybe I'll get him on the show just because he introduced me to all this crazy stuff. He got in my car, I think that same event when I hopped in his, and he left foot brakes. And he touches the pedal, and he's like, what's wrong with your car? Like, because it was braking and grabbing so hard. He's like, and once we got out, I said, no, that's how it is. He goes, there's no way I could drive that. I'm like, well, yeah, if you had enough practice. But he was freaked out. And I feel like in the Corvette, I think maybe it was him that told me, you have so much power, you can get back up to speed so quickly that you can trick yourself into feeling that you're fast, but you're really over braking or slowing down too much for features because the car can handle so much.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. It goes back again to operating that much weight, that large of a car at a high average speed. That's where the challenge lies.
Yeah.
So it takes.
Okay.
I was going to say, unlike say an SP car, it takes earlier commitment, smoother lines maybe, because it's not gonna accept these real abrupt inputs to correct things.
And which car won't accept those inputs as well?
I don't think the Corvette would.
Oh, okay.
Versus say, an SP car or something where, at the limit they're still very responsive. You're kind of along for the ride a bit in the Corvette, somewhat more committed.
With the momentum or the weight and such, it makes sense.
Yeah, they've got soft bushings and, relatively soft suspension, things like that. So
take us back to some of the cars you drove, some of the most memorable cars you drove over the years.
Sure. I've been fortunate to, again, a very understanding wife and has allowed me to rotate through the cars. And, I think one that still stands out was an NA Miata, that I had prepped for CSP and had a late model engine in it and things of that nature. And that car was just a really fun car, really fun on the street. And, in fact, it's still being run today in the club. It's usually got 3 or 4 drivers in it in every event. So it's good to see the old cars around. But that one, that was a pretty cool car. That's going to be hard to replace. My F-Stock Shelby was a lot of fun. I've really grown to like, the on-ball aspect of the Mustangs and the live axle nature and some of the character that brings. So, that car was a lot of fun as well.
And this last year ESP, what was that? Good, bad, and different animal?
Yeah, no, ESP in John Hogan's car. I mean, we got it working really well, and that was a really very fast car, very big, very heavy car. Again, not super forgiving in some regards, but yet very rewarding at the same time. So that was a lot of fun with the big tires on it, the big wheels, really good steady state grip, and very raw. That doesn't necessarily feel very graceful at times, but yet it really gets the job done.
Having taken those tires out of the back of his truck and put them in mine, it's hilarious when you have that next to like a 225 tire. I'm like, this is insane how large those were. I mean, what diameter and what width?
They're 335s on 12-inch wheels, so pretty good width. But the car was weighing 3,600 pounds, so still a lot of mass to hustle around.
Oh, my. And I have to interject here, and I'm becoming a lightweight car snob. I bought an STRS 2000 a couple of years ago and drove it some before I bought it. And then I jumped in it again, and I felt like it was big and heavy compared to the Civic. I was like, it doesn't really accelerate that much more. And when I go to hit the brakes, I mean, it didn't have the fancy upgrade package on it anymore for braking, but I was like, man, I may have to keep the Sprint and actually figure out how to race a lightweight car. But in reality, the more I talk to a lot of you guys, I'm like, okay, I should be jumping around cars more often. And I have the opportunity this year to do at least some of that. Although part of me is like, you got to stay committed. You're finally getting your Civic redone like you should have done last year.
Well, you know, hop from one car to another, you know, it really helps you question whether you have to accept certain characteristics on the car, right? You know, you say you hop into the S2000, it feels heavy, and you know, the question I had in my head was, well, maybe is it too soft? You know, and sluggishness is making this car feel heavier to you than it really is. So, you know, bouncing around from one car to another, you know, I think it can help you get back even into your own and say, you know, why isn't it doing something quite as well as I think it should? And then it maybe allows you to question accepting certain behavior.
Very good point. Yeah, that don't just accept them on face value. Question, yeah, can it be changed? Can it be more adapted to my style and such?
Yeah,
exactly. As soon as I say that, I realize the friends that bought John Ames's Corvette, the Z06, sitting in my barn, I was like, maybe you shouldn't. I think eventually they changed the setup because how he drove might not be what they could handle. And the same thing with us and tires in the Civic this year. They drove the Rivals because they didn't want that crisp feel you talked about earlier. Whereas I love that. And I think that I give myself maybe credit that I never thought I had. I do accept some level of feel, or I have some level of feel. And the Rivals, I couldn't figure out where the heck the grip was at. So, yeah, like you're saying, maybe just stiffening cars if they're changing setup things will really help get the performance out of them.
Yeah, and, you know, people come to me with setup advice quite a bit, and I'm not going to tell them that I know the only right answer. You know, it really comes down to what works for each driver and what allows them to drive well, because there's always more time to be had and lost in execution than there is in ultimate setup. That's just kind of always been my approach.
Oh, I so agree, although I'm the guy that never changes shocks and didn't even put water shocks on the car. There was one article in Sports Car years ago where they took a Subaru, I believe it was a Subaru, and they ran it, and then they changed up the shocks and springs, and they ran it and improved like 3 or 4, 8, 10, something. But it made me realize once you get somewhere in the ballpark, especially in a Civic, I feel, it all comes down to you at that point.
Yeah.
Once you're in that range, you can tweak it for what you like better, but you're all pretty competitive. So, okay, you've talked about some of the cars you loved. If you could drive anybody's car that's out there right now, whose would it be and why? They might let you do it right as soon as you say this.
Boy, that's a tough one. I'd like to drive some more of the mod cars.
More than one. You can name more than. You can name several.
Yeah. No, I mean, you know, some of these mod cars would be a great experience. I mean, some of these cars they're so different. You know, I wouldn't go and expect them to be fast necessarily, but you know, I mean, Kiesel's Sprite would be high on the list for sure, just because you can't duplicate that anywhere else. You know, the Hyman's GTR, something of that nature would be a very special experience. You know, I've been fortunate to drive some pretty cool cars over the years, such as Stromic's RX-7. You know, running locally, I've gotten to run some of Fred Duff's iterations on his XP car as well. So, but yeah, I think Kiesel's and the Hyman's car are probably high on the list.
All right, we'll put in a good word for you. I mean, you only have 6 championships in 6 different classes.
Like I said, I wouldn't expect necessarily to be fast, but it'd be
exactly.
It would be a lot of fun.
Exactly. If you could build any car, I give you a budget, whatever it is. Here, build a car. What is it? What's the next one? You can't pick the one you're now playing.
You know the sad thing is, the first car that comes to mind would be a Fox body Mustang of some sort. You know, I've always liked to kind of pick underdogs, and yeah, I've been fortunate to have some success in some, but you know, to me, it's just, you know, is the car cool or not? And the Fox body Mustangs, the notchbacks, you know, they have a little special place, I guess, for me. So it's one of those deals where if it was someone else's money, I'd love to go to town on one of those.
Man, you did not say a Chevy Sprint Turbo. I mean, it's on the trailer. I'd probably be driving today. Okay, yeah, maybe that should be for sale. Everybody, let me know.
Well, how are you going to top Van? I mean, he's got that covered. So.
No, he's jettisoning it this year because neither one
is.
of us are working on it. And as you realize, since we never have even gone through and replaced anything to do with the engine, and yeah, it has a few issues because that stuff hasn't been done, but yet it has a $1,500 limited slip in it. I am seriously considering. I don't know if Ron Williams will dare do it, but when I get my Civic back from him, I'm like, maybe I'll just ship that to him because even if I sell it, I'd rather it be like in a great running condition. It probably has several vacuum leaks, which would explain the slowness at nationals.
Okay.
But yeah. So
that's close to that. Another one that I've always thought would be pretty cool would be a street mod Toyota Starlet. Some little old 1980s rear-wheel drive tiny car. Put a decent motor in it. I think it'd be pretty fast.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. I can actually picture a friend of mine bought one at one point. He was going to do street mod or something. And you'd mentioned early on, I think you said finding out how much money you can spend. Luckily, I went to Nationals my first year, and an Audi S4 of all things. Big, heavy pig in D-stock. But I saw what money went in street mod. And I came back and like, oh, you got to mod your car and do that. I said, no. I saw a Cobb WRX with $60,000 put into it that could not compete. I was like, I get it. I don't have enough skills anyway, but it takes a lot of money and skills. And I was like, I'm not willing to commit. So, as you said, you can modify wrongly and be in a class that's expensive.
Yeah. Well, and you got to make sure that what you're doing is actually gonna, make the car faster or not. So. Yeah.
And that's where I would tell people to bounce ideas off people like you. Locally, I did that as well. I mean, the whole idea of the Chevy Sprint Turbo was never mine. Kevin Winslow had driven one with a stuck wastegate and said, hey, you might try that for FSP. It's pretty lightweight or what have you. So literally, back then, I was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to learn all this stuff about cars. And then very quickly, I'm like, I'd rather play farmer sometimes in my free time than work on cars. So, yeah.
Well, that's good. You got to keep balance sometimes. As you know, we were talking earlier, and, you got to have that drive. Otherwise, it stops being fun, and that's what it's supposed to all be about. So, at the end of the day, we're racing around parking lots for plastic trophies. So, if you're not enjoying it, then maybe it's not for you.
Oh, no. Yeah, the things that bring me back, I'm like, oh, I like competition, but literally, I've got to meet so many people across this country by driving hours and hours to race for a few minutes, and it's something that a lot of us can relate to. It is silly, but I guess it's all a personal challenge for some of us. Like, oh, can we figure this out? What can we do? If you like to turn wrenches, kind of tweak this and tweak that, and figure out something else there.
Yeah, I think we compete for different reasons. I'm not going to argue with the level of competition. I mean, it's tremendous. I was somehow lucky enough in my first championship to win that 38,000. So I mean, it was basically a flip of a coin there. But
or like an inch or two. I mean, if you calculate the distance for the speed at the finish, crazy.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a competition there. We're both within the class, but I think all of us are competing against ourselves. We're trying to really see what we can do as drivers or tuners, and the social aspect is obviously a huge part of the sport. So
I'll have a drink with you sometime, but it'll probably be only one, because I don't want to lose my wallet. Or actually, I guess somebody took your wallet. But.
Yeah.
Coming to the mental aspect of course walking, how much do you do it? What are you doing when you're walking the course? What are your thoughts pre-game and that kind of stuff?
Sure. Again, I'm not going to say there's any one right way to do it, but I am a very, very firm believer that course walk is important. You really have to put together a good mental plan of what you want to do. And the walks, to me, I walk enough to where I basically have a step-by-step plan in terms of where I'll be looking and the when and the timing. Timing's really important too. So, sometimes I'll walk a lot. Sometimes I may only get a couple walks in. It just depends. But like you said, I'm not one to walk dozens of times, because I think then you end up relying too much on almost just muscle memory instead of keeping that proactiveness to your approach. So, for me, it's one or two casual walks at the bigger events, and then at least one or two, by myself, where I can focus and really try to put that movie together in my head.
Nice. So how many, are you picking out all the elements, or are you picking out 5 or 6 at an event?
Good. Yeah, good question. So really all I do is I walk for my exits. I'll I'll basically make sure that I have visuals on every exit before I get to a breaking point for that feature. And the other thing that's very important is you don't just look at single cones. I'm always trying to pick up what I call like 1, 2, maybe the apex and then an exit gate cone. But I'm always trying to draw mental lines off the corners. So if I have an idea of the line I need off the corner, there's a much better chance that I'm going to execute the first 2/3 of the corner right, because ultimately I know what my exit needs to be as far as car direction to be able to set up the following feature after that.
So you're seeing a mental line on the ground between the cones, between several cones to be key.
I wouldn't say a line on the ground, but I would say direction. So it's, if anything, a plane, vertical plane, that I'm always trying to have the car oriented towards. But I really don't look at entrances. I don't think about car placement on entries. I don't think about braking zones. It's really just a simple matter of looking for my exits, which is going to consist of maybe the apex cone and then whatever cone or feature I need to connect a line coming off that.
Yep. Okay, and that's where I'm reminded of the Jeff Gordon book I read part of or all of. He said, we don't have speedometers in these cars. We look, and our butt tells us if we need to slow down or not. And basically, you're saying by looking over, you'll know when to brake. You'll know how much to brake because you're looking at the exit, which once again, is looking ahead and knowing where you're going.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other key thing, too, is to take advantage of the straights. You have not a lot, but there are opportunities on courses, I would say more so in the lower horsepower cars, perhaps, where you're not really doing much, right? And that's the time you need to get your head and your eyes up on a swivel and just look as far ahead as you can, scan up, back, take information in so the brain has a better picture at speed of what things look like.
Yeah, very good point. And even when I'm walking course, I turn my head, and I think I'm going to definitely try to understand what your approach is. But I look over and go 1 cone, 2 cone, 3 cones. Or I see how far I can look ahead to go, when I'm here, I should be looking there so I know, once again. And I keep on thinking about the Pro Solos in Lincoln, where you go down and you take a left or a right. And when it comes to that braking zone, I probably screw this up sometimes, but I'm always trying to find what are the next 2 cones over that I really care to get into. And it sounds like that's kind of what you're doing on all your exits.
Yeah, and that would be more for the bigger turns. When you mentioned that 1, 2, 3, 4, that's really important. Let's say if you approach a transitional series, let's say it's a 3-cone offset wall or a 3-cone offset wall, or a series of offset gates. You have to make sure that as you approach that, you pick up the entire sequence, right? So a quick scan all the way down, see the whole sequence or whatever it is, instead of only fixating on maybe the first 1 or 2 cones.
Yeah, and I probably don't do that as well as I should. That brings me to the thought of slaloms, not only looking at them but braking. Do you look down the whole line of slaloms? Is that what you're saying?
Well, Junior here, he may fire me because, we're supposed to look all the way down to the end of the slalom, but I don't. Honestly, I'm looking 3, maybe 4 cones into a slalom. But to me, it's very important that, obviously you're backsiding the first cone, but you don't really, don't look at the first cone though, because it's too easy to spend too much time mentally making sure that you backside it, and then you're going to be behind for the rest of the slalom. But for me, it's gauging at least the first 3 cones, let's say, maybe 4 cones on a really long slalom, but then making sure that I'm getting to that exit of the slalom as quick as possible visually. To me, slaloms aren't really, we talked a lot about, segment times, which is important, but at the same time, slaloms are an opportunity to find an extra 80 feet, maybe 90 feet of acceleration over your competitor by not getting behind in the slalom. So you go in the first couple cones, you make small adjustments in the midpoint if you have to make sure you save your exit. And then if you're doing things right, you're rolling onto that gas, maybe before the second to last cone, right?
Yep.
And you just picked up a lot of throttle time over your competitors.
Yeah, I probably said that in so many videos. Same thing. It's like, although we'll get to a braking question in slaloms, but literally, as long as there's something fast after the slalom, you don't want to be getting further and further behind because then you can't accelerate out. So my goal is always, can I accelerate out of this thing?
Perfect.
2 or 3 cones. However soon can I get on the gas to get out of this thing? Even if I get later and later, I just better not have that, oops, I got to touch the brakes or lift.
Exactly. I mean, most course designs are going to have a gap, right? They're going to have a turn, a gap, a slalom, a gap, a turn. Yep. And so there's going to be an opportunity to find more throttle there.
Yeah, that's what I tell people, especially that's one thing when I first went to Nationals, not knowing what the heck I'm doing. Okay, I can walk the course 10 times each. I started just writing on the distance between every cone. because I didn't know why people were walking the courses. I'm like, okay, there's 10 paces here and 20 for that slalom. That's what I tell people in slaloms. If it gets tight somewhere, know that so you can be at the right speed to then accelerate past that. I don't know how often I guess we see it nationally, but I know locally, at least when I do courses, sometimes we'll have that. We'll have a kink somewhere in there to be very aware of.
Yeah, it's good to pace them off at least once just to get an idea.
Yeah. Tell me, do you ever find situations, or not very often or never at all, where you would fly hot into a slalom and try to deal with braking into it to get to the right speed, but maximizing your speed into it and then adjusting?
No, if I'm hitting the brake in the slalom, something bad's happening typically. I much prefer to have the speed for the slalom set as I'm tucked behind the first cone.
Okay.
And I try to be a little on the conservative side if possible. Again, just so it helps my chance of being able to be early and on the gas for the exit side.
True, yeah. I know I do that at times, and unless I guess had data, which I haven't done also in years, I don't know how good it is. Now, a pro solo where you get 6 runs, I realize it's so dicey, especially I guess in these front wheel drive cars, that when you're hitting the brakes, you still have to find a flat spot between the slalom cones. I don't know, maybe it's a low horsepower thing. I feel like sometimes I come into those things. It's just interesting. As I keep asking people, I'm the oddball so far that even risks. I mean, it is a risk, I realize, to come in, especially if you wait till the second or third cone to brake, that it's getting a bit risky there because you are getting behind or pushing or something.
Well, Kim, to your defense, I've driven STS type cars and not I haven't campaigned one, but it's one of those classes where you really have to be absolutely pushing the limit at carrying as much speed as possible. You really do. It's a function of the applications in terms of power to weight, and it's also a function of how competitive the class has gotten from a setup standpoint. You're typically not going to have a lot of time over somebody with the setup, and it's going to come down to just not slowing down as much. So, I respect the fact that you do have to push, especially in a pro format, right, where you've got lots of runs to try to get that flyer run in, to where you may end up where you're having to brake on the third or fourth cone. But, as long as it's a little amount, that's justifiable, I think.
Yeah, I've done it for even in D-Stock. Those good breaks. I can picture, I don't remember a lot about courses, but literally, I guess when it gets hairy, which if you're flying in a slalom and trying to brake in, turn, those are the ones that I kind of remember.
A little hair on fire there, right?
Yeah, no, too much of that. Oh, something I'll probably mention every interview. It finally hit me, and I can't believe it took me how many years, probably 8 or 9, that, especially at a pro solo or any event where you're getting multiple runs, like all of them, if anything, my braking zones, if you're going to dare memorize one or think about one, I would find that, which a hero run has probably never worked for me, that I try to brake later and later. But in reality, as you make a run, you're probably going faster and faster into every section or every braking zone. So I finally had the light bulb, and everybody should think about this. I can't imagine a hero run where you get to brake later and later unless you know you screwed that up. What are your thoughts on hero runs, and have you ever thought about, my brake zone might change, or I'm going to push it in the brake zone or never push it in the brake zone?
So I think there's 2 parts to that question for me. When I try to go find time, backing up, I can't remember where I've gone to a pro and say, okay, I've got to make a flyer run here, or a hero run or something like that. But if I'm trying to find time, it's always looking for it on the exits, right? Where is it that I think I can carry a little more speed through it, and I don't approach it where I'm trying to brake later or less. But it's saving that exit. But the other part that I'll say, and this has been true for, especially when I'm running street tires like an SCR, SCU, this worked really well for me to help find time on courses, and that was to try to really push the entry phase, in terms of being able to feel the front corner load up and scrub a little bit of speed off. So going back to what you were saying, it's very easy to try to brake later or brake harder, right? And then what tends to happen then is we've created this situation where we probably overbraked, right? And so for me, it's a matter of chasing on corner entry, pulling my braking back maybe a little earlier, actually, if anything, and maybe a little bit less, to where I can be off that brake just a little bit earlier in the corner phase, and I can feel that front outside tire scrub a little bit more speed off, because that tells me, okay, I've done a better job of probably maximizing the corner entry phase.
Yeah, and you can probably, what I'm imagining is it might be easier to, with the steering wheel and scrubbing off speed, to not slow down too much, is I think exactly what you were saying.
Yeah, it's just a much greater chance that I'm going to be finishing that first part of that turn much faster than if I try to go in and drop anchor even later, even harder, even more perfect. And so it seems to have worked well for me in terms of coming in and seeing improvements on the clock.
Yeah, no, that's a challenge for me. Literally, I'm going to take from this interview and go, okay, yeah, can you dare try? Because especially since I've made the mistake of, I'm going to keep my foot in the throttle just a little bit longer. I mean, last year at Nationals, I know I did it. Like, no, you did that okay. Why did you? It's something bad ingrained.
That wasn't the problem.
Yeah, I'm going so fast. Oh, a little bit more. Oh, wait, you now can't slow down at all. Yeah, oops. So tell us some history. Have you done tracking? Have you done F125? Do you video game? What else do you kind of do? Of course, you don't get a lot of snow, so you don't need other things.
I have not driven. I could probably count on one hand the number of times I've driven in snow. But yeah, I mean, there was obviously a lot of video games. Towards the Gran Turismo. I have done shifter kart schools at Bondurant. I had an F125 kart for a while. I've done track events, NASA time trial stuff, redline time attacks. I've done some of that. The track stuff for me, just the reward hasn't been there for the investment, in terms of the wear and tear on the car, the entry cost. For me, autocross is just much better bang for the buck, especially in terms of the competition that you can get. So. Yeah,
competition, like you said, even the social aspect. Do you think some of that's definitely benefited you? Did it teach you anything? Do sweepers easier because you've done spent track time? Anything you think you gained?
Yeah, I mean, seat time is good, regardless. And track events can certainly help your comfort level at speed. But it's training different mental aspects than I think you need for autocross in terms of, how you approach things visually and mentally and for a proactive effort. But, the higher speed certainly allows you to work on separating yourself from the car mentally if you're applying those practices out there, rather than just staring down at braking zones and the braking markers and things like that. So there's some benefit there. I won't argue against it.
And after talking to Julian Garfield, is like, everybody should do F125. Usually they're pretty cheap to get one. I'm like, okay, maybe I'll get a full face helmet and try this at some point. Just to play.
Yeah, absolutely. The mental speed that's required and the physical level, of course, is a whole other level. The challenge visually of actually seeing your stuff just because you're bouncing around so much.
Oh.
But the mental speed, I mean, that, we've talked about that in some schools that, we're doing this mental movie thing, right? And so there's many events where I will be watching F125 or another faster class if I have the opportunity to, and I'll watch them on course and I'll use their speed to accelerate the timing of my head in terms of going through my movie.
Feature.
Exactly. So it's a great tool.
Very interesting, and that's where sometimes I still watch. It was Ron Williams, like, oh, you don't hardly ever watch. I watch other cars to see what's going on. That's why my car's in his shop getting the bushings all done correctly. And literally, I think you can learn to say, oh, is there something I didn't notice out there or some gotcha where people are blowing it? Mm-hmm. But I love that thought of okay, I'm going to watch that car go through the course. And, okay, it's this feature, turn, looking there. I always tell myself, I'm looking there, I'm looking at that cone. I kind of pick out which cone. So I think I'm doing something similar to what you're saying there.
Yeah, it really helps with the timing because, it's very, very difficult once we get behind the wheel to keep that mental focus, proactiveness going forward quick enough, right? And to avoid getting into a reactive mode. So if you can go through things at least at a faster pace than necessary, it's going to make it easier when you actually get out there behind the wheel.
Yep, go feature. Then it seems like it's slow motion, I guess. You're in the zone. That's where Leslie Cohen, when they wrote about her a couple of years ago, it hit me. She goes, I love it because you have to focus for like 60 seconds. And I'm like, why is this a challenge for me? Because sometimes it's not a full 60 seconds. I'm like, I can't focus. Focus for 60 seconds. Look ahead. So tell us, you have 3 girls and a wife. What tips do you have for us to kind of wrap this up and tell us anything else? How do you get away from home? Is it flowers? Is it a certain kind of flower? Or what is it?
I've been very fortunate. It has been getting progressively more difficult for everybody, myself included. I don't like being away. Everything comes at a cost. So I think in a way I've tried to make sure that when I am away that I'm keeping things productive and I'm trying to advance towards whatever goal it is that I have. And but it's getting tough. I think at some point, you know, if I want to keep pushing hard, which, you know, right now I'm feeling less motivated, I guess. But you know, there's certainly the junior card option and getting the whole family on board. And so
that was the next question. I was like, well, are they in a cart yet? So with the 5 and 7-year-old, the 7-year-old's driven it around a little bit, the one we borrowed.
Okay.
And it sounds, I wasn't pushing though. I've been a different dad than I thought I was going to be, like pushing him into sports and everything. I've been waiting for him to say, yes, I want to do this. And luckily he finally going, oh yeah, I'd like to do this after going to, I don't know how many pro solos with me now. That definitely helps me with my wife that I take a kid and now maybe I can take 2. I'm somewhat scared, although I work pretty well when I'm scatterbrained and don't know what's going on. The amount of time and effort it takes, it seems like the Carter's parents do.
I'm 100% with you. I often have noticed that I'm sitting back enjoying a beer at the end of the day, and I see Rick Jung or somebody over there reaching on the cart, you know, for their son. So I fully recognize that. But same here. I haven't been pushing the kids, and you know, the older one says she kind of wants to do it, but you know, until there's a lot of time spent on the video games first and enjoying that, then you know, we'll go from there.
Okay, I probably can't get away with that tip. My wife will shoot me, but literally we're about to get better high speed that isn't limited, as I'm probably paying for overages right now. And it's like, okay, I'm going to get GT6 because everybody's talking about it. And if nothing else, the mental pressure, get used to, okay, can I make this lap count? So that's the one thing hearing from people from F125 to I've go-karted some years ago, but not on a track, just the indoor stuff.
Okay.
It does seem like if you can pick up one cheap enough, it seems like something fun to kind of go and tool around. But the amount of effort to really compete, just jetting and changing things like you're saying, just kind of goes, whoa, I'm pretty lazy.
Yeah, we've seen your car. We know.
Yeah, that's once again, I'm going to plug Ron Williams a few more times and say, I'm that crazy. I said, Ron, you told me a year or two ago what I should do to my car, and I never did it. Here's my car. You know, the shocks I got from Jeff, put them on.
Yeah, well, I do the same thing. You know, they've been putting shocks on my cars for the last several years, many years actually, and Pro Parts always does a great job there. So.
Yeah, it's like, please help me do better. And that's why I'm buying the shocks from Jeff so that I can actually try the adjustments. And then they sat on his car for a whole year. I'm like, yes, I'm okay making fun of myself.
Yeah, but you know they're there for when you really want to engage, right?
Yeah, when I really want to try to screw something up, I'll have them there so I can try. Oh, it's the shock's fault. That's it. So, Brian, let me know if there's anybody else who want to plug any other thoughts. I appreciate all the time and really all the insight, because a lot of us do look up to you from what you've accomplished and what you've accomplished again in so many different cars over all these years.
I appreciate that. You know, the plugs again, you know, Pro Parts, you know, I wouldn't go anywhere else for my shocks. They do a great job. They've been doing it a long time, and they've been on a lot of championship winning cars. Evolution School, it's given me not only to help me as a student, obviously many years ago, but it's given me some great opportunities to give back and to even improve my own driving, sitting on the other side of the car. So very thankful to that group, and glad to see it continually giving back to making people enjoy their hobby even better.
Yeah. No, and once again, the purpose is, how can we help other people and give them anything that'll help them? So I'm glad you've been doing that. Although when I did the Evo school, I get car sick.
Oh,
so
no.
I got to find some pills or something. That's where I told him, Junior. I was like, Junior, I still get car sick. I said, I can drive all day long, but as soon as someone starts jerking the wheel, I'm like, I wasn't ready for that. Don't do it there. So, Evo schools have been great. I keep trying to get more into them as the driver, and he keeps kind of rejecting me. But someday he's going to let me take some more of these schools, I swear. So.
Well, it's you know, even people who've been doing this a long time. You know, you're paying for the instruction. You're going to hear a lot of stuff that you probably heard before, but it's the opportunity to drill and to practice that we just don't get as autocrossers. And you know, that's one of the big benefits of the school for people that, you know, feel like they've been doing this a long time and want to try to get better. Go do the school. I guarantee you'll get something out of it.
Like you're saying, seat time. Oh, one thing how many events a year at your max do you think you've done versus what you're doing now? Same, different?
All right. Well, first of all, rule number one with autocross is don't add it up. So that applies to everything. So I couldn't give you an event count, but you know, I'm sure some of the STR, I put a lot of testing time in to make that 350Z work. I was probably doing at least 2 to 3 events a month, I would say. Being in the Southwest here, we're fortunate we can run year round, so you can do the math on that one. Anymore, it's maybe an event a month, and I'm a little more selective maybe at where I go and what I do to just because the time's more limited.
I look up to you. I keep saying I want to be one of these guys that can race once a month and still be fast. and I look up to you for what you've done, and like you're saying, giving back, teaching, and being open and talking to us and letting us know what your thoughts are and sharing. So once again, I appreciate all the time, and it's been great. Thanks for listening. For the show notes and contact information, please visit autocrosstalk.com. There you can also subscribe so that we can keep you up to date on new shows as they come out. Also, please leave us a review on iTunes and subscribe on iTunes for the upcoming shows. You can connect to our Facebook page at facebook.com/autocrosstalk. You can share your thoughts, your insights, your questions, your suggestions there. Also, share with your friends. Hopefully you found it entertaining and motivating, and hopefully other people will as well. It's been fun, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening, and check back next week for the next show.